Ford spent 10 years researching it. They burned through $250 million, back when $1 billion meant something. They hired a famous poet to help name it. They ran the most expensive launch campaign the car industry had ever seen. And on launch day, nearly 3 million Americans walked into showrooms to look at it. And then they laughed at it. 2 years later, the car was dead. The name had become a national punchline, and a single word, Edsel, entered the English language as a synonym for failure. Here is the strangest part. It was not actually a bad car. This is the story of how Ford did everything right on paper and produced the most famous flop in automotive history. To understand the Edsel, you have to understand a gap, a hole in Ford's lineup that executives stared at for years like a missing tooth. It is the early 1950s, and America is climbing. A factory worker buys a Ford. He gets promoted, makes a little more money, and wants to show it. He trades up to something fancier, a medium-priced car. And here is Ford's nightmare. When that loyal Ford man trades up, Ford has almost nothing to sell him. General Motors has a whole ladder. Chevrolet, then Pontiac, then Oldsmobile, then Buick. Each step a small announcement of success. Chrysler has Dodge and DeSoto. Ford has the Ford, and then a big jump to Mercury and Lincoln. The internal studies are brutal. Every year, hundreds of thousands of Ford owners move up, and most of them move straight into a General Motors showroom. Ford is essentially raising customers for its competitors. So in the mid-1950s, with the medium-priced market booming, Ford greenlights the answer. An entirely new car division, not a new model, a new brand with its own dealers, slotted into that golden gap between Ford and Mercury. Internally, it is called the E-car, E for experimental. And this is where Ford does something genuinely ahead of its time. They decide the E-car will not be designed by gut feeling. It will be designed by science, market research, consumer polling, motivational studies. Ford commissions researchers to map the psychological personality of every car brand in America and to engineer the perfect image for the new one, the car for the young executive on the way up. The name search alone becomes legend. Thousands of candidates are considered. Ford even invites the celebrated poet Marianne Moore to suggest names, and she delivers gloriously unusable ideas, including, famously, the Utopian Turtletop. After years of research and stacks of consumer testing, the final decision lands in a boardroom, where Chairman Ernest Breach essentially shrugs off the entire scientific shortlist and picks a name that was never near the top of any consumer ranking: Edsel, the name of Henry Ford's late son. The research had spoken. Management ignored it. Remember that pattern. It is about to repeat all the way down. What follows is the largest build-up for a product launch the industry has ever attempted. A campaign built on one weapon: mystery. Through 1957, Ford teases the Edsel without showing it. Advertisements run with the car under wraps, or photographed so distant and blurred you can see nothing. Billboards promise simply, "The Edsel is coming." Dealers, and Ford signs up roughly 1,000 brand-new dealerships for the division, are required to keep the cars literally hidden until launch day. Employees are sworn to secrecy. The press is drip-fed hints of a revolutionary automobile. The strategy works almost too well. By late summer 1957, public curiosity is at a boil. Expectations have inflated to something no machine could satisfy. People are half expecting a spaceship. Launch day is September 4th, 1957. Ford names it E-Day, like a military operation, and the public shows up. Industry accounts put the crowd at nearly 3 million Americans pouring into Edsel showrooms in the first week. Staggering traffic for a new brand. They walk in, they look, and the first thing every single one of them sees is the grille. Most 1957 cars wear wide, low, horizontal chrome grilles. The Edsel wears a tall vertical chrome ring, dead center in the nose, the famous horse collar. Designers intended it as distinctive, a callback to classic vertical grilles of the 30s. The public has other comparisons in mind. An Oldsmobile. Sucking a lemon, says one. Others are less polite, much less polite. Within weeks, the grille is a national joke, repeated by comedians from coast to coast. And here is the cruel math of car retailing. People came to be amazed, found something they had been told was the future, saw a styling gimmick they could mock, and the mystery campaign that built the crowds now amplified the punchline. The bigger the hype, the harder the laugh. But a funny grille alone does not kill a car company's $250 million bet. What kills it is everything else going wrong at the same time. And in the autumn of 1957, everything else went wrong at the same time. Start with the cars themselves, because the early Edsels had a quality problem. And the reason for it is one of the most instructive blunders in manufacturing history. The Edsel division had no factory of its own. The cars were assembled on existing Ford and Mercury lines, mixed into regular production. Picture a worker who installs Ford parts all day, every 50-some seconds. And now, a few times an hour, an Edsel comes down the same line with different parts, different trim, different procedures. Workers had little time and, frankly, little incentive to master a car that interrupted their rhythm. Stories from the launch period became infamous. Cars delivered with parts in the trunk for the dealer to install. Oil leaks, doors that would not shut right, push buttons that did not push. Ah, yes, the push buttons. The Edsel's signature gadget was the Teletouch transmission. Instead of a shift lever, you changed gears by pressing buttons mounted in the center of the steering wheel. On paper, the future. In practice, an electrical headache, and placed exactly where decades of drivers expected to find the horn. More than one Edsel owner, attempting to honk at a hazard, shifted gears instead. Now add the economy. In the autumn of 1957, within weeks of E-Day, the American economy rolled over into a sharp recession. The 1958 model year became a bloodbath for the entire industry, and the medium-priced segment, the exact market the Edsel was built to conquer, was hit hardest of all. Buyers fled toward cheaper cars and economical imports. The golden gap Ford had spent a decade studying was closing. At the precise moment Ford drove into it, and add one more quiet structural problem: pricing. The Edsel lineup sprawled across 4 series, and the cheaper Edsels overlapped Ford's own upmarket models, while the expensive ones bumped into Mercury. The car designed to fill the space between Ford and Mercury ended up competing with Ford and Mercury, and confusing customers about what exactly an Edsel was supposed to be. The sales target for year 1 had been over 200,000 cars. The reality, roughly 63,000. The most researched car in history was missing its target by about 70%. Inside Ford, the autopsy began while the patient was still breathing. For 1959, the Edsel was toned down, simplified, and cheapened. Fewer models, tamer styling, the gadgets dialed back. The notorious Teletouch was on its way out. Sales fell anyway, to roughly 45,000. The brand was now caught in a death spiral familiar to anyone who studies failed products. Nobody wants to buy a car that might be orphaned. And every newspaper story asking, will the Edsel survive, guaranteed fewer buyers, which guaranteed more stories. The corporate politics turned just as cold. The executives who had championed the e-car program were gone or sidelined, and the rising power at Ford, a young Robert McNamara, the numbers man who would later run the Pentagon, saw the Edsel as exactly what his spreadsheets said it was: a hemorrhage. McNamara had never believed in the program, and now the figures were on his side. The 1960 Edsel arrived looking barely like an Edsel at all. Essentially a lightly disguised Ford, the horse collar gone, the identity erased. It was a brand wearing a witness protection disguise, and it lasted barely a month on the market. In November 1959, Ford announced the end. Total, 1960. Production, around 2,800 cars, making the final Edsels, by beautiful irony, the rarest and most collectible of them all. The final accounting was grim. Across the program's life, Ford had sunk an investment commonly reckoned at $350 million, and the losses are most often cited at roughly $250 million, comfortably over $2 billion in today's money. Around 118,000 Edsels were built across 3 model years, a number Ford had expected to beat in just 6 months of the first one. And the name of Henry Ford's own son, a decent and talented man who deserved far better, became American shorthand for catastrophic failure. To this day, when a product flops hard enough, journalists reach for the same word: an Edsel. So was the Edsel actually a bad car? Here is the uncomfortable answer the punchlines skip. Not really. Strip away the grill jokes and the launch chaos, and the Edsel was a competent, even capable, 1950s automobile. Decent power, comparable engineering to its Ford and Mercury siblings, and a few features ahead of their time. Its true defects were not mechanical. They were strategic. It answered a market question that the recession had withdrawn. It was positioned into a gap that no longer existed. It was hyped beyond any car's ability to deliver, and it was named, styled, and timed by executives who commissioned the best research money could buy, and then overrode it whenever they felt like it. That is why the Edsel never left the business school curriculum. It is studied not as a story about a weird grille, but as the definitive case of process without conviction. 10 years of science, undone by a handful of gut decisions and one badly timed economy. Detroit learned too. The Edsel disaster pushed Ford hard toward smaller, cheaper, simpler, directly feeding the compact Falcon program under McNamara. And the Falcon, as you heard in our last episode, became the secret skeleton of the Mustang. Follow that thread, and the irony is perfect. The bones of Ford's greatest triumph were funded by the lessons of its greatest humiliation. And one final twist of the knife, or maybe of fate. Today, the laughed-at loser is a prize. Surviving Edsels, especially convertibles, and the ultra-rare 1960s draw serious collector money precisely because of the story you just heard. The car America refused to buy at $3,000 now sells for many times that, because failure, given 60 years, ferments into legend. But the Edsel was Ford betting big and losing. 25 years earlier, the same company made an even bigger bet, Henry Ford gambling the entire firm in the depths of the Depression on an engine his own engineers said could not be mass-produced. He won, and the people who thanked him most enthusiastically were bank robbers. That story is next.